Welcome back to the Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is your host, Kate. Culture is one of the big idea words we hear a lot, but don't typically define. Yet it plays a significant role in work and our work experiences. Personally, I like to talk about culture as the sum total of the experiences and perspectives we all bring to work. Essentially a shared creation of the workplace. I've also heard it described as the climate of a place, the environment established by leaders, or even simply how we do things here. What connects these descriptions and definitions? Shared contributions and a sense of involvement. So when we talk about building or fostering workplace culture, we can make the leap to thinking about mutuality. But what exactly do we share and how when it comes to our workplaces? My guest today has a background in clinical social work and has turned her expertise and attention to matters of mental health and healthy workplaces. Sarah Harris, owner of Connect Counseling and Sarah Harris Speaks, provides training, coaching, and keynote addresses that help managers cultivate healthy workplace cultures. Sarah has a practical approach to creating and improving culture, and I'm excited for our conversation. Sarah, welcome to the Comfy Chairs. As I've shared, I always like to give my guest an opportunity to introduce herself, so please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an intense pleasure to be here. I really appreciate your time. So my name is Sarah Harris. And I am a professional speaker doing keynotes and workshops, as well as individual and small group leadership coaching around the concepts of how to build a healthy workplace culture. I got into this because I have had my own practice in mental health as a licensed clinical social worker and have been working in that field for over 20 years. And one of the things that I have found in helping people kind of navigate their 9 to 5 is that their workplace culture significantly impacts their mental health and how they are feeling at the end of the day. So I have kind of conglomerated all of that experience as well as research and current practices to really kind of build out the opportunities for leaders to learn how to build their own healthy workplace cultures.
I am oddly reminded of Severance, the TV show. My husband and I were latecomers to it and just binged through it. And, you know, there's the entertainment level that it happens on. But because I'm a workplace leadership nerd, because I'm a liberal arts student, I find myself doing these other analyses of what's going on. And one of the things I appreciate about it is I think it's giving kind of popular culture this opportunity to examine what does our work life mean for our home life, and can we really separate them? Mm-hmm. And I personally think the answer is no. I feel like Severance has said work-life balance, it's a sham, right? That we can't fully separate that. So we have to understand that people bring themselves to work. They bring their lives with them. They can't leave it at the door, like the old cliche. Mm-hmm. And work has a significant impact on the rest of our life. When we're not at work, work is still with us. Mm-hmm. And it'd be nice if we could separate it, but humans aren't like that. We have to be whole beings to be well. So conversations about culture, the climate, the environment, the thing in which we work has to be a consideration for mindful, caring leaders. I've rambled on a little bit, but I'm very fond of starting with definitions. You know, I shared, here's my shorthand for culture in the introduction, the sum total of everything we all bring. But I would really like to hear from you how you define culture.
Excellent. And for me, workplace culture are the expectations of how we are to respond to both our coworkers and the customers of the business, as well as how to handle unexpected events
Hmm.
and trust that leadership will support your decisions in those situations, even when they aren't present. And for me, that back half is really the key because workplace culture is not only about when leadership is present, but more about when leadership is not present. What have they set up? So I'm a mom of two. I have two teenage boys, and I relate that a lot to the culture that I have developed in my household. My kids are old enough to stay home by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have rules about who's allowed to be in the house and who's not allowed to be in the house and what are you allowed to do and not allowed to do. And everybody pushes limits with their parents, and that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. But in the workplace culture, that's the same mentality. If the boss is gone, are we using that old phrase of when the cat's away, the mice
Yes.
will play, right? Are we developing this mice will play and kind of do whatever they want to do? Or have we fostered a workplace culture that allows everyone to understand this is how we do things here?
Mm-hmm.
This is what is expected of us. This is how we interact with our customers. And when those unexpected, unplanned events occur, because they will, that everybody on the team knows how should I respond to this? And if I respond this way, management will support my decision. Even if it doesn't turn out well, they may ask me, they might question me, but they will support because I was following the protocols that were set up in the workplace culture.
Yeah. I like the addition of unexpected events, Sarah, that because those are the moments that culture really shows itself. It's if everything is hunky dory, if everything is sunshine and kittens, well, of course, we're all going to treat each other, coworkers, clients, selves, with some decorum. But when things fall apart, what does that look like? And do we have norms to fall back on and the confidence that leaders will be supportive?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what do you view as the essential elements of a healthy culture at work?
So I have really taken to dividing it into three sections.
Okay.
The first one is that I think that communication, how we say what we say, is a key component of culture. The second component to me is your physical space. Does the physical workspace foster creativity and collaboration? And the third being policies. Do those policies match the needs of the employees?
Hmm.
And I do think, Kate, that one of the things that we also need to pay attention to is that each of those gets modified slightly and adjusted whenever we are working in an environment that is virtual or a hybrid work environment,
Yeah.
because those are factors that are a little bit more outside of the control of leadership. And how can they take each one of those components and adjust them accordingly?
Well, with that framework, it makes adaptation a little easier because you have those guardrails.
Correct.
I'm really curious because let's see if I can organize this thought succinctly. I'm going to state the obvious. Culture involves our relationships. So I think I can extrapolate where that fits in to the elements that you talked about. But I'd like to ask explicitly how does this framework address how we are with each other?
Sure. I think that, one of the things that I bring to the table that is maybe slightly different than some other leadership coaches and folks that are in the workplace culture environment is the fact that I have over 20 years of experience as a licensed clinical social worker. And what I bring to that is that relational component
Mm-hmm.
and understanding the neuroscience behind it. And so if we were face to face in the same space, I would play with things like, what does it feel like in your system for me to stand while you're seated?
Mm.
What does it feel like to have me typing away as I'm saying, yes, sure, come on in, open door, feel free to ask any questions. So, understanding biologically what is happening in the system then fosters that relational component that you were addressing, right?
Yeah.
So, if there is a sense of a power differential, obviously there's going to be a status power differential already between leadership and anybody that they direct report, any of the direct reports that they have. Um, but there's also little nuanced things that happen at the biological level for people to really learn about. And they're simple to understand once we kind of break them down, but understanding that helps to foster healthier communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
Also, when we talk about physical space and the relational components, um, you know, dating myself a little bit here, one of my favorite movies is Office Space.
Well, yes.
And you look at the world of cubicle living, right? Cubicles were designed with the idea of everybody has their own space. Well, great, except it's not really your own space because you're sharing a cardboard wall with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So understand the relational privacy needs of individuals within the context of physical space is very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we start talking about policies, that to me is one of the biggest crux around understanding relationships with each other. A lot of time when we think policy, we think very dry. We think the check boxes. I have to make sure I follow all the law. I'm not saying don't follow the law. By all means, please follow the law. But then take a step back and say, okay, so if I was another human being working in this environment, how do I expand this a little bit so that I'm meeting people where they are?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things that we start putting that relational component into the policies aspect.
Yeah. This is a new way for me to think about culture, the biology of culture. And I kind of love that we're having this conversation right now for myself, honestly, Sarah, because I find myself talking more and more about how much fear drives humans. That unfortunately, we are still afraid for our lives at every turn. Even though our world has evolved beyond that, our brains haven't.
Correct.
And if we can recognize that everybody's moving through the world trying to keep themselves safe, I think it bumps up empathy, it bumps up understanding and kindness. And thinking about the biology of culture is a wonderful lens for that.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like the fact that you are starting with what are the structural supports we need. Yes, relationships matter. Yes, the experience matters, but without structure, scaffolding to support it, we're probably not going to get to the healthy places. It's just beautiful, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. The very first guest I had on this year, a gentleman named Justin Clifford, CEO of a company called Bereave that is focused on bereavement practices. They have a platform to deliver resources and support. But a lot of the work they end up doing is talking with people about their bereavement policies, both employees who have been impacted and companies who want to make a difference. And that's what you were talking about, is are we meeting people where they are, and do the policies enable that and not prevent it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a very relatable experience with that several years ago. My mom passed away And at the time, I was working in a partial hospitalization program as a clinician. And for your audience that is not familiar with that term, this is just about a half a step below inpatient mental health care. So this is a very intense environment. Our clients are with us 5 days a week, and they're receiving individual care, medication management, group therapy, all of those things. And one of the groups that I typically ran was the grief and loss group.
Mm.
And my mother had had about a 9-month stay overall prior to her passing in rehab and hospitalization and things like that. So by the time that she had passed, we were all pretty exhausted and grieving and doing those things. And I went to my manager at the time, who is a fabulous example of a manager. And I said to her, I don't think that I can hold space for an entire therapy group's level of grief for right now. I need my own space for that right now. I am happy to do other things. That is not a group I can do. And the response that I got was such a beautiful example of healthy culture. Let's try 3 months. For 3 months, I am not going to assign that group to you. We're going to have somebody else do it. That does mean you need to pick up a group that I'm going to let somebody else out of. But let's try 3 months. 3 months was not a hard deadline. It was a try. At 3 months, we reconvened. Again, like I said, workplace culture is about catering it to your work group. What does your work group need? And then to be able to take that time without guilt. No, it was just known across the work group, Sarah is not running the grief group for this amount of time. And that's part of that culture is I just had permission to not.
Yeah. Well, it's very good to hear that a counseling environment took care of its people. But we can't always assume.
Not in all environments in mental health, but
right. But one of the things that's wonderful about what your manager was able to do for you in that moment is they didn't set the work needs aside, right? It wasn't just, okay, Sarah, you don't have to work for 3 months. It was, we're going to change assignments. There is work to be done. We are going to make an allowance, an adjustment for your circumstance, but everybody's going to get care.
And I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that that is an important thing when folks are listening to the messaging that I am sending out. Sometimes there is a little bit of a reservation and they say, oh no, I have to babysit the emotional needs of my employees. No, you don't. Please, if they need therapy, send them to therapy and suggest it, help them to get there. That's fabulous. It is not your job to be any of your employees' therapists. That's not your job.
No.
But being able to, going back to that relational word that you use, being able to be present in the relationships. What is it that you need? And then, of course, the funny thing is that the healthier your workplace culture is, the higher your productivity rates and your retention rates are. So your business actually thrives and grows when you take these things into consideration. You are not losing productivity, you're actually increasing it.
Exactly. Well, and it may be in the moment you are, but the long-term payoff for having treated, if we stay within this example of bereavement practices, if you are kind to people, if you make the accommodations that keep them safe and keep the work going, yeah, there may be a dip in productivity for a few days, a few weeks, but you'll make it up over time. The same gentleman I mentioned, Justin, he's done some, I'll say research. He's done some surveying, asking people who have experienced a significant loss, did they stay at their employer? And if I remember correctly, the number is 51% of people who have experienced a significant loss leave their employer within a year because they've had a big life change and because the job didn't respond well to them.
Mhm.
And we've all heard the numbers, how expensive it is to replace someone.
Mhm.
So maybe take the hit, if you will, if you're very focused on things like productivity as a manager. Yeah, take a dip in productivity to save the cost and expense down the road.
Mhm.
So even if you are more focused on the numbers than the souls, if you will, over time there will be that balance because it
Mhm.
does make good business sense.
Mhm.
Which is a
Mhm.
head scratcher for me, that all of the research shows us that these considerations about how people are treated and behave at work ultimately impacts the bottom line. And yet there's still resistance to it.
Mhm.
We're just silly that way, aren't we?
I actually was at a networking event a month or so ago, and a human resources director of a major bank in the local area and I were talking, and he said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're talking about this because I just had 3 of my tellers quit." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "Well, that's really difficult." I said, "Do you know why?" And he said, "Yeah, the other bank is a little bit bigger, and so they're able to pay more." And I said, "Do you do exit surveys?" And he said, "Well, yes, of course." I said, "Excellent. Is that what they told you in the exit survey? Because that doesn't line up with the research. The research supports that it is about company culture and ability to be seen and heard and have room for growth." And he kind of stepped back for a minute and looked at me and he took a long breath and he said, "Well, that was the things that they talked about in the interview." But what he saw was that the locations that they were rehired, the new banks that they were hired, offered higher salary. So immediately that mindset was, if I throw more money at it, then they'll stay. And so just in that little 5-minute conversation, he kind of walked away and went, "Okay, I think I need to readjust things. I need to think a little bit more about how things are run."
It is horrifying to me, Sarah, that in 2025, anyone in HR would default to money
Mm-hmm.
as a cause for leaving. That is,
Mm-hmm.
I am aghast
Yeah,
at that.
yeah, but it's happening,
It
and it's happening
is. It
pretty
is.
consistently.
Well, yes, some people leave for money. Some people
Mm-hmm.
stay for money.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfectly fine. But the other thing we know is that the benefit of more money has it has an expiry. It typically lasts 1 to 2 pay cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And then the joy of having a raise evaporates.
Right.
And the other factors that influence our work experience and our willingness to stay, those rush to the forefront again. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're working with a faulty foundation, you're going to lose people.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
isn't this is a good transition to my next prepared question for our conversation. There seems to be this little tug of war out there in the literature and the theories and mindsets about who owns culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I've waffled over it myself. I have
Mm-hmm.
many opinions, but I tend to, depending on the circumstances, be very firm one way or the other. Is it senior leaders? Is it managers? Is it the front line? Is it everyone? Who really owns what at the end of the day? And is it even definable?
And thinking about that, my immediate answer is yes, all of the above.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, I believe that it is the C-suite responsibility to set the tone. So for them to set up what is appropriate, um, what kind of rules and policies and communication styles and physical space do we put in place? So we are going to have to start at the highest level. Your other lower level managers are there to maintain and to keep an eye on the culture. And I do believe that it is their responsibility to course correct when needed. And then when you asked about kind of is it everyone, I think that, when I talk to folks about communication, one of the things that I talk about are the break room jokes.
Mm.
If you have a break room where somebody makes a joke about a female, about a specific gender, about a specific race, about a specific, whatever, put your ism in there. If the employees in that break room laugh, then they are going contrary to your workplace culture.
Yeah.
So it is the responsibility of everyone to go, hey, man, I can see how that's funny. I don't really think that that's an appropriate joke for this setting. Right. So, as I said, my answer to your question as far as who owns it, I think that it isn't everyone, but not that everyone owns it at the same level.
Yes.
And that's the difference. We don't want the next 20 years to all be reflective of the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has been kind of a standard in the last 5 years for us to all step back and reflect and go, oh, wait, as you said before, life shows up at work. It shows up. It has always shown up at work.
One of the arguments about who owns culture that I've heard, putting the responsibility onto the workforce, it was this kind of numbers game that, well, there are only a handful of C-suite people and hundreds or thousands, depending on company size, of employees. So it must be the employees that are making it happen. And the answer to that is yes. Because culture is going to happen. It just is. If you bring multiple people together, the kind of calculus of our relationships, our expectations is going to form a culture. It happens at work. It happens in friend groups. It happens in your homes. Culture happens. If leaders are not intentional and mindful about it, then yes, the workforce is going to make culture happen. And what the senior leaders and managers need to understand is it's there. Is it what you need? If you are not involved, are you going to get the culture that you need? And the example of break room jokes, that's where you actually see your culture at play. If everybody's laughing, you may have policies that say this is prohibited, but the actual culture is. So has everybody stepped up and taken their level of responsibility? And is it clear to people that have responsibility but low authority, our frontline employees, what's expected and what the consequences can be? Both sides of consequences.
And that goes back to our earlier discussion of my concept of culture in general is how are people responding when leadership is not present?
Yeah.
If I use my children and my culture in my home, every time we leave for any extended period of time, I go through no other friends in the house, don't answer the door. This is why. Those are all just groundwork for this is how you behave even when you're not home. And my kids are old enough now that even though I repeat it, they sigh. Mom, we know, no friends in the house. I got it. Okay. But I know that I have done well then because they're not going, yeah, but I want to. No, it's understood. This is how it is.
I always get a little squirrely when we kind of naturally start talking about leadership and parenting as corollaries to each other because employees are not children. However, it really does illuminate that there are ways to lead that aren't at work, and culture exists in all locations. I spent some time last week with a group of leaders talking about their team norms. smart group of professionals, dedicated leaders, and I was a little surprised by how challenging that conversation was for them.
Mm.
Not because they don't know how or they aren't doing the things. They're a pretty high functioning team, but defining this is how we behave with each other in these circumstances was such a foreign way to think about the work.
Mm-hmm.
And what we were able to finally kind of illuminate for them was, yes, it's wonderful that you're doing this, but if it's not clear, when there are unexpected moments, when you
Mm-hmm.
add new members to your team, how are they going to know? How
Mm-hmm.
will you know unless it's really clear? And we
Mm-hmm.
used the thing that kind of helped us with that was, how are you using different channels of communication?
Mm-hmm.
You know, one person sends email, another person sends a text, and we all have our own understanding of the level of urgency of those things. If you don't share that understanding, it actually makes you less effective and less productive because
Mm-hmm.
your wires are crossed. So we have to talk about not just the relational parts, but the observable behaviors, and make our standards for how we treat each other, how we act in different circumstances crystal clear. The mom we know is a good example of that. People
Mm-hmm.
should be like, yep, we know.
Mm-hmm.
And that shouldn't stop you from talking about it. That should be a norm, that we talk
Mm-hmm.
about our behavior expectations repeatedly, not because we think people don't understand them, but because we never want to lose our shared understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Behaviors, observable actions. What are some of the leadership behaviors that you think are necessary not only to create but maintain that healthy work environment or culture?
So one of my favorites is active listening.
Okay.
And so for your listeners, I will give them the script of active listening. So active listening is the process. So we're going to have a speaker and we're going to have a listener. And the speaker is going to share their ideas, and the listener is going to keep their mouth closed and their mind open. And the speaker is going to finish what they have to say. And then the listener will say, "This is what I have understood you to have said." That is not their opinion. It is regurgitating, "This is what I heard you say." So, the reason we ask that question, "Did I hear you correctly?" is that all of us approach every interaction with our own biases.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even if we feel like we are giving the information back in a mirrored way, our own biases fall in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The second question that we ask is, "Did I miss anything?"
Mm.
And the reason why we have to ask that second question is there's this really weird phenomenon in that we speak and listen in opposite ways. And so, what tends to happen when we speak is that we gather up the important point at the end. But the way that we listen is exactly the opposite. You're in your head about what they just said, and we don't listen to the concluding sentence. So we're going to listen actively that way. And only after you have done those three steps are you then able to say, "My thoughts on that are," and you then switch roles with the one that was previously the speaker, and you become the speaker and they become the listener, and then we do this all over again. It sounds tedious, but it eliminates miscommunication, it eliminates misunderstandings. It also really helps with that collaborative process. So active listening is one of my big take homes for folks. The other part that I really like to talk about under that communication umbrella is transparency. And transparency is always with boundaries. So we understand that in the business culture, there are some aspects of the business that the lower level employees are not going to be privy to. So
Yes.
I am not asking C suite executives to open the doors wide open and say, these are all the things that I am doing. But even if there are things you cannot discuss, letting your employees know what the umbrella topic is. We are restructuring the benefits package for 2027 and investigating those things. We have not yet decided what that's going to look like. That's being transparent, because if we are not transparent, we're going to go back to the break room again for a minute. That is where the rumors get fostered and they grow. And unfortunately, in the workplace, what I find a lot is that those rumors have enough of a grain of truth in them
Yes.
that then the employees launch it as fact.
Yeah. One of the things we have to remember, if you are going to take a leadership role in an organization, yes, you can't communicate everything, that there will be boundaries, as you said. Transparency is about the boundaries more than anything else. It's, hey, I can't talk to you about this yet, or these are decisions that are being made above me, but this is what I can tell you. And then communicating the thing, but recognizing without information, people are going to fill the gap. People will fill that gap with their fear. And if the culture isn't addressing those fears actively, if leadership isn't aware and attentive of the fact that we're all moving through this world trying to keep ourselves safe, then the culture will be driven by fear as opposed to by goals and mission.
And I would build on that fear, honestly, as part of transparency as well. So none of us want to work for robots.
It's addressing the fear without minimizing it or amplifying it.
Correct.
And it's so tempting during times of change, because culture really shows up when you're undergoing major change in ways that it doesn't before. We talked about this earlier. But during times of change, are you able to say, here are the feelings, here's the information, here's the work we have to do today? If the way you communicate, if the space that you're working in, and if your practices, I'll say practices instead of policies, if they are aligned well and clear to everyone, then the emotional part gets carried along with, as opposed to taking center stage. It sounds so easy when we say it that way, right?
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit more about physical space? It's
Sure.
kind of easy to sit in communication and policies and practices, but yeah, physical space impacts culture. I've seen it in hospitals. I've seen it in office buildings. I've seen it in retail settings as an employee myself. And yeah, we don't always have control over that.
Right.
So what are the accommodations? What are the efforts that can be put toward it in your experience?
So I think there's a couple of things involved there, right? So first and foremost, as we talked about a little bit earlier in the show about open versus closed workspaces, what do your employees need? How much privacy do they need to function? Thinking about, do we need a completely closed office space where everybody has their own closed door with four walls? Is it better to have some collaborative spaces? Are we looking for open office spaces? What I would argue is that regardless of what you do, as far as which style of workspace you set up, that you make sure that the opposite is available for your employees. So those are two of the things. The other thing that I try to highlight for folks that they don't think about is, are your bathroom stall doors functioning and lock?
Yeah.
We spend more time at work in the US culture than we do at home. And what does it say about how your company perceives you as a human being if while you're going to the bathroom, you have to squat and hold the door at the same time? That is just something that people don't think about, the emotional impact of that. Color, as we know, there's a whole science to color.
Yeah.
What are you doing with color in your space? And how much creativity do you allow for your individual employees to put color or mementos or whatever in their own individual workspaces?
Back to, what does the work require? What does the work need as well? Where do you allow people's personality to show up in a way that doesn't impede getting the job done? So how are we able to allow the person to shine through and still respect to them when certain aspects of the work do require sameness? Those are the type of considerations. And I think if you are thinking about things like, is the bathroom clean and well maintained? Is there light? That is accounting for their humanity in different ways. Yeah, you're right. I've never thought about the state of the bathroom being a cultural indicator, but it is.
But it very much is.
Is it saying this is what we think of you at one of your more vulnerable moments? Something that I saw, I think either on your website or your LinkedIn, Sarah, was talking about bridging the gap between employee skills and the culture. And as we've been talking about behaviors and actions, I'd be interested in flipping from leadership actions that maintain healthy cultures to why healthy cultures make it possible for people to work at their best.
So I think that comes back to that humanitarian level. So when we interview new employees, we look at their resume, we look at their credentials, we do the interview, and we hear all these fabulous skills. And we say, oh, I want to hire you. And then we do them a huge disservice. We put them in a box. And we say, okay, I hired you to do X, Y, Z. And so this is what you're going to do. And we forget that they have this out of the box way of thinking about things, that we have this other strength that maybe is not common with their peers. And so it's one of the things that I talk about is helping employees to advocate for themselves. Like, hey, there's this project coming, but they can only do that if they have a healthy culture where they know they're not going to be belittled for that. But encouraging employees to say, hey, you know what? I really am interested in that, or I would really like to know more about that. But when you have that healthy workplace culture, then the employee feels comfortable stepping in. When we do the bottom up and the top down together, and we say, this is my strength, these are my whys, these are my questions, right? So bridging that gap between leadership and the employees.
So I have a practice that I want to share that I think goes to this, and it is a culture setting practice as well. That if your team is manageable, I recommend meeting every other week. If it's not a new employee, then you need more. There's always adapt it for the circumstance. One meeting is focused on the work, progress, barriers, wins, all the good stuff. You are looking at the person's work product. Is it meeting expectations? Do they need additional support? So on and so forth. The second meeting is all about the employee, that you're talking with them about their progress, their performance, not the stuff, but them, and their development opportunities. What are their aspirations? What are the ways that you can, put their puzzle piece into the larger picture? You're learning about those additional skills and interests. And that way you are constantly balancing the work and the person, and performance and the individual. It has been my personal practice, and I have found it to be a great way to keep one, to be aware of this is the work that's going on or isn't, and to ensure that I am engaging the individual in the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that last component is such a key factor.
It's how are you engaging with that person? And you're setting that tone of you do the work, so you are important. And one of the ways I'm going to be with you is communicate with you frequently about here's how you're doing.
Right. Right.
What I think I really like the conversation about speaking up about your interests and your skills
Mm-hmm.
and having an environment that's safe to do that, because it loops us back to the who owns culture. And there's creating culture and then functioning within it.
Mm-hmm.
And we all do have a part to play.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the accountability for culture is ultimately on, the top, the point of the spear, if you will. If that person isn't mindful about it, isn't setting the tone and expectations and monitoring it, you're not doing your job. I do think, as you've pointed out, managers are responsible for the maintenance and monitoring, the course correction. They are the kind of the vessels of communicating what the cultural norms are to people. And then employees have the responsibility to enact culture.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about how I participate in the culture, am I doing things like speaking up, whether it's in the break room or when an opportunity presents itself? Managers, are you not just knowledgeable of the norms, but do you know your people well enough that you're matching them to work? You are accommodating appropriately based on individual need. And then senior leaders, do you see it as an accountability and responsibility, and do you model it?
Mm-hmm.
So you say, this is what we need, and here's what I do to ensure it. And it closes that loop of how we create and maintain. My brain's just going. I love these conversations, Sarah. I'm so fortunate that I get to do this. I get to talk with interesting, smart people doing interesting, important work. And it makes my brain fire in new and fun ways.
Well, and I've really enjoyed the conversation, because I think that too often, like I said earlier, people believe that paying attention to culture means that you have to hold people's hands, treat them in some super soft way. And that isn't what we're trying to do. I want your business to succeed. I want increased productivity. I want increased retention for your business. What I will tell you is, if you look at everybody as a number and you don't pay attention to the people, it will fail.
I feel like this is a very similar conversation to accountability, that we have this all or nothing, a very binary approach. If I'm talking about engagement and culture, I must be super soft. If I'm talking about accountability, I must be mean. No, in every case, what we are talking about is, are we clear about what we expect of each other? Do we have mutual understanding and agreement that this is what we're here to do and how we're going to get it done? And do we respect one another enough to be constantly clear? Do we care enough to adapt and modify as need be? Do I respect and care? Am I clear, and am I compassionate? That creates culture. That establishes accountability.
And they're not exclusive of each other.
Oh, heavens, not at all. In fact, unaccountable cultures are some of the worst ones out there. I like to ask people if there are any final observations or takeaways.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things that we mentioned earlier that I want to come back and re-highlight is recognizing that we honestly spend more of our waking hours in the US culture at work than we do anywhere else. And that the research says people do not generally leave because of money. They are leaving because of the culture. And so what we can do to create spaces where people feel seen and heard and valued there was a quote somewhere that talked about the idea that a good leader is not necessarily somebody that knows all things about the company in which they work. A good leader is the one who recognizes I need a diverse group with me with different skill sets that can support the overall mission.
I don't have anything to add, ma'am. I've just enjoyed this talk. As I said, it's a great way to start the week. It's a Monday morning when we're recording, and I feel my brain going, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome, and I thank you for the opportunity. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today. If this conversation sparked something useful, please follow the Comfy Chairs and leave a review. Those small actions help more people find the show. Got a leadership question you'd like featured in a future Comfy HQ episode? Please send it my way. I'd love to hear what's on your mind. And when you're ready to move from ideas into action, 123 Limited helps leaders build stronger teams, sharper strategies, and better talent plans. Learn more at 123limited.com. That's ONE23ltd.com. Thanks for listening.